Hello, good morning. Hello, hello. All right, I think we are live. Let's open up the chat. Hey everyone, can you guys hear me? Sweet. Yep, cool. Alrighty. Good to have you guys here. So today we're gonna continue working and just finalize the Sci-Fi corridor. There's a couple of things that I wanted to get out of the way before we start, and then I probably will mention it throughout the stream again. Basically, so I'm moving houses in the middle of these crazy times. Fortunately, that's it was pre-arranged before all that. So I'm moving houses. So next week I'll be unavailable. The only issue, and the reason I'm telling you this, is because the reconnection of my internet would be until about 1 week from now, meaning that I won't be able to check the challenge. So I decided to extend the 2020 First Contact Challenge for about a week, about 8 days. So right now the deadline is 1 day and 14 hours. I'm gonna extend this deadline. I will put everything in the challenge. So if you go to the website, you will see the reason and everything. So I'm gonna extend about 8 days, and you will have time to, if you haven't submitted, you have an additional week and additional 8 days to complete it. If you have already submitted and you want to do some changes, you can totally do so as well. Just thought I'd let you know because again, was something that I wasn't counting on, but that's what happened. So ultimately you have more time to submit. There's some really cool stuff coming through already. If you go down to the bottom and you click on the vote section, you can vote, by the way. Even though if you're not participating, you can still vote. There's some really cool artworks coming in. But yeah, so I just wanted to let you know about that. Again, I'll mention that later on as well for anyone that joins us after this announcement. And then if you got the digital clay pack, I'm sure you got an email. Just wanted to come back to this and let you know that there is a free update. So you should have got an email. If you haven't, make sure that you email me. But yeah, it should be there. Maybe check your spam folder beforehand. But again, there's like a pack with 10 new brushes and 15 new matcap materials to work with. They're pretty cool. So they're slightly different. There are 3 new or 5 new spatulas that are really cool to work with clay. And again, the amount of work that you guys have been creating, it's been phenomenal. So yeah, just wanted to kind of like give a little bit back again with those additional brushes and materials which are free for the pack. But yeah, that's about it. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so just to do a quick recap of what we have so far and what we are trying to do with today's stream, I'm going to go into solo mode here. So we have the walls, and these walls are actually made out of only one section that is being duplicated using Nanomesh. So we're using a plane. So if I show placement, enable Polyframe, there we go. So it's a series of just single polygons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And basically using Nanomesh, we are inserting a single panel, a single piece of the wall in each one of these polygons, right? So that's how we're creating that wall, and then we're using array mesh to basically flip and duplicate that mesh over to the other side to create the other wall. So that's kind of like the most complex one out of all the pieces. We also have this kind of like frame, right? That is just one frame that we use for the door, and then we're duplicating this using also array mesh with just different settings. So all of this is covered in the previous streams. I just want to give you a quick rundown of where we are at. In the last stream also where is it? Where's the floor? Here we go. In the last stream, we also went ahead and did a grid, that one that you can see there. So that's the grid, and we just duplicated that grid across. We did it with Nanomesh. We created a custom Nanomesh brush. So if you wanna, like, if you don't know how we got to this point, you can just watch the previous sort of like episodes of the creation of the Sci-Fi corridor. And then the idea of today is just convert everything that we've done so far, Nanomesh, RMesh, everything like that, convert it into just regular meshes, regular objects, and do some final arrangement, final tweaks in terms of like adding asymmetry, adding a couple of tubes, and that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and start with that, because that's one of the things that I mentioned we were gonna do straight away in this session, which is just add a few tubes in here. There are, again, many different ways to do the same thing in ZBrush. It's just a matter of maybe try different things, see what works for you, what would speed up the workflow in different projects. For me, in this case in particular, I think the easiest way to go about it would be to just create a custom insert brush, or like tube brush, that have multiple tubes, so I don't have to do it manually one at a time like I did for the door. So here for this section, I use the curved tubes brush, and I just manually place these ones. If I were to do the same thing for the floor here, again, can totally be done that way, but I reckon we can simplify things a lot more just by creating a custom brush. So we're gonna go ahead and do that first. It's gonna be very simple, and I'm gonna start with a cylinder. So let's go ahead and click on a cylinder, and this is a primitive 3D, meaning that we don't have some of the options that we usually have with the mesh or the poly meshes. So we go down to the bottom and click on initialize. Here we can change a few things before we actually commit to create this tube. And because this is going to be the basis of the tube that we're going to use for the insert brush, then we probably need to reduce the amount of subdivisions just to keep the polygon count low. So I think I'm going to go for 8. Maybe let's go for 16 actually, and then we can reduce the vertical divide to none, right? And this is going to be just a little portion, a little section of that tube. So this is going to be repeated vertically in this case, and every duplication is going to create that an additional vertical slice or poly or edge loop around. So again, just 16 and 4. Hang on, what did I do? Yeah, no subdivisions in the vertical. And let's go ahead and click on make polymesh 3D. So now this is a mesh that we can edit. So the first thing I want to do is remove the caps of this cylinder. We can use the C modeler for that. I'm going to turn off perspective, hold the Alt key and tag these ones. Same thing for the other side. Right click, select delete as my action, and delete that. I'm also going to enable double-sided polygon, which for you guys should be under the display properties, so that we can see inside of this mesh. All right, so that's pretty much it, really. What I'm going to do now is maybe increase the height of this a tiny bit, or maybe, you know what? Let's keep it simple. Let's leave it like that. You can change the height of this, and if you change the height to, let's say, something like that, then when you create the brush, it's going to have like a bigger gap between sections, so it's not going to have as much resolution. If you change it to, let's say, something like this, then it's going to do the opposite. It's going to have subdivisions closer to each other, so it's going to have a lot more resolution in a way. So I think we're just going to keep it simple. So something about there is fine. The other thing I want to do is create multiple tubes. So I'm going to do that by simply holding Ctrl, click and drag, and just moving these to the side. And I'm going to change the size, but I'm going to leave a couple that are roughly the same. I'm going to do this one more time from the x-axis, and this one I'm going to scale it down a bit. and just playing with the Gizmo 3D to reposition this. Play around with the sizes. Hold Control, click and drag. Something around there. Maybe another one, another smaller one there, and another one around there. So just a bunch of random cylinders that ultimately are going to make up the like a complex set of tubes that we can convert into a complex set of cylinders that we're going to convert into a curved tube brush in a way that are ultimately going to be the cables or the tubes for that section underneath that grid. Let me just check the chat. Cool. Brian, can I get your UI? You can get a bunch of UIs that I've made in the ZBrush Guides website. Not this one in particular. I'm happy to share it. It just has a bunch of things that it won't work for you. Like I have a bunch of custom made macros that simply won't work with this UI if you don't have the macros. Cool. All right, so now that I have this, one thing that I think is important in this case, so that we can manipulate the cables later on a little bit easier, is to create custom groups or like auto groups, everything. For you guys should be under the Poly group panel, just the auto group section, because none of these cylinders have any continuity in the topology. ZBrush will assign a different polygroup. All right, the other thing that I want to do is make sure that when I stretch this along the curve, they're going to be merged or connected. So the gap between these, the difference in the height of these cylinders is going to be a problem. So what I can do is just hold Control and mask those vertices at the top, invert that mask, hang on, mask, invert that mask, bring in the gizmo, center to the unmask points with this icon here, and then I can just flatten this to the y-axis, make sure it's completely flat. That's one way to do it. You can also use the clip brushes in this case. So like I said, many different ways to do the same thing in brush. All right, I'm gonna do the same thing at the bottom. Flatten those. All right, so now everything should be lining up perfectly fine. All right, so now let's go ahead and create a new brush. So I'm going to click on the brush thumbnail. Actually, let's chuck that on the right hand side so you can see what I'm doing. Under the Create tab, I'm going to click on Create Intermesh. Click a new one. And basically what we have is just a normal Intermesh now, right? But once we have the Intermesh, we can go to the stroke palette. Let's chuck that on the right as well. And I'm going to enable the curve mode. So now we should have a curve. Now that's going to have a lot of resolution because my brush size was really, really small. I didn't realize. So let's undo that. All right, let's make it proper. All right, cool. So now we have a curve brush that is working with all of the tubes that we have. The problem is that this is generating all of these gaps, and that's something that we have to control within the modifiers tab of the brush panel, so we can stretch these polygons and also merge them together, and also add the resolution to the curve. So let me undo that. Let's go to the brush palette, open up the modifiers, and what I want to do is weld points, so that again we weld those points when we stretch them, and stretch them so that they stretch. So just by enabling these two things, we should have something a lot better, at least connecting with each other. Just 1 second. All right, I have a problem again with my Wacom pen. It's gonna be one of those streams, I guess. All right, let me undo that. All right. the other thing, so let me just recap again. Well points and stretch for that, and then I'm going to increase the resolution of the curve to something like 15 or 20, should be fine. And now we have a curve that we can manipulate with a bunch of tubes, right? It's as simple as that. So of course, we can go ahead and save this brush. I'm going to save it in the desktop. Tubes. And what I can do after we finish with this is I'll create a nice little pack for Sci-Fi interiors and share it with you guys if you want to use the brushes that I've made and the assets. All right, so now that we have these, I'm just using my mouse and my keyboard because my tablet is gone for now. Let's go back to the floor. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this. All right, so now we have the tubes. Of course, this is massive, but just want to do that so that I can manipulate it a little bit more. There we go. And I will probably want to go ahead and go to the stroke palette and make sure I do have snap on. Cool. All right. The other thing you can do is if you want to simplify this even more, I'm going to lock in the start and the end so that when I pull the end or the start, it just basically smooth the whole thing. Or you can also click and then hold the shift key. So click and then shift, it will basically smooth that that curve. But I think that's working fine. Let's go ahead and reduce the brush size and click again, and I will update the size of the tubes, and they're still pretty big. So let's go ahead and do that one more time. I'm gonna have to do it even more. All right. So that's probably what I want anyway. I'm gonna click on a snapshot, or in my custom UI I have it mapped to the number 5 in my keyboard, and that basically, yeah, it's gonna do a snapshot. So it's gonna drop that set of tubes already in there, but it's gonna leave the exact same curve that I have, and I can just move the curve and have a duplicate of those. So I'm gonna do the snapshot, and I can just increase my my modifier brush here. And this is all I want to do. I just want to add a bit of variation here. You won't be able to see this, hang on, because I have already some geometry there, and I have the snap function. ZBrush is snapping those the new curve into the current set of meshes. So I'm going to click on snap to turn it off, and now it shouldn't give me that sort of like twisting effect. So what I was saying is that all I want to do is just to generate some variation, and you won't be able to see this as much, but I think that's fine. I'm gonna push this on top. All right, now I'm gonna clear the mask, and I have my set of tubes. It's not very easy to see in the stream, but I'm gonna click outside just to accept those changes. And then I'm gonna move into a move brush so that I don't accidentally click and drag a new set of tubes. And I'm gonna isolate all of these tubes. Basically, remember we have different set of polygroups. I'm gonna isolate everything but the tubes, and then I'm gonna move them in place. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now now that I hidden everything, I can go ahead and click Ctrl outside the canvas, bring back everything, So I can bring in the Gizmo 3D and move this in place. So that's going to be just inside, around there. I actually like this shape closer to the door, so I'm just going to flip that. Oops. And push it up. All right, so now it's just a matter of placing this obviously below the grid. It might be a little bit tricky, but I think it's fine. We just use the move brush to adjust it a little bit. And like I said, the grid is pretty small. Like it has a very narrow gap. So you won't see a lot of these things, but they all add complexity to the design, and they're just so simple to create. All right, so just moving this in place. And changing my brush size so that I affect, smaller portions or larger portions. But that's about it. So since the angle is going to be kind of like this from this point of view, then like I said, you won't be able to see much. But if you get closer, it's going to be a bunch of cables underneath, which I think is pretty cool. Another thing you can do, and that's the reason we use different polygroups, is to use the isolate individual pieces, or you can also use the move topological, and then you can just move a single one like that and just change the the position of one of these ones a bit more, and just make it a bit more random. And that is the reason why I created those polygroups in the first place. There we go. So just getting closer so that I can actually click on the one that I need. Otherwise I'll be clicking on the grid itself. Another way to do it, since this one is a little bit hard, is to hold Ctrl and Shift to select or isolate a single tube, mask it, invert that mask, and then use the move brush, the normal move brush, to just adjust it. But that's it. That's all I wanted to show in this next step. All right. How do you move the IMM menu to the right hand side? The IMM menu. Oh, you mean the stroke palette, I guess. Any palette, you can just move it by simply clicking on this. Let's say if I want to move the texture palette to the right, I open the menu and click on this button here on the top left, click and drag it. You can do that with any palette. Do you know a 3D designing thing for free? Just on Google to not download. I'm not sure what you mean, mate. A 3D designing thing for free on Google. Not sure what you mean. Oh, sorry. The okay, West. So you mean the IMM viewer? So that is. So if I select that, you mean this thing on the right? That is the IMM viewer, and you can change that from the preference palette. You can go to the interface, I think it is. Yep, IMM viewer. So I have it set as 2. The value in this slider will change it. So if I set it to 1, that's the default one at the top. For me, it's just more useful to have it on the right hand side because it gives me more vertical real estate on the screen. You can also have it at the bottom, the left hand side, or you can simply hide it altogether And when you have an IMM brush that has multiple ones, let's say you select this one, right? That has a bunch of brushes, and you want to select it. You can do it in different ways. If you don't have the IMM selector, you can go to the brush palette, and on the modifiers, you can click on this thumbnail, and that gives you access to this, and you can just choose. Or you can also press the letter M on your keyboard, and that will, anywhere you have your pointer or your mouse, is going to bring the palette, and you can just change it from there. So it's up to you. The purple diamond. So like ZBrush and Google. Yeah, I can show you something. It's obviously not the same. But if you're interested, it's called Sculpt GL. So that's kind of like I guess the closest thing to what you're asking. So it's like a web, a browser-based sculpting tool that you can use. I teach this one to like some of my students that are like super new to the whole 3D thing. I do start with this because some of the shortcuts and the way that you approach sculpting in this program, which is not a program really, well, it is, but is web-based. It can be translated to ZBrush quite easily. So if you're not too sure about getting involved in 3D, this is probably a very easy way to start, and then you can move into ZBrush Core and then ultimately into ZBrush. But of course, is nowhere near the level of complexity and the control that you have in ZBrush with this other software. But I guess if you just want to muck around with 3D, that's one, or a web browser-based thing, that's probably the way to go. All right, so give me 1 second. I'm going to restart ZBrush and my Wacom services so that I can keep working with this. Otherwise I have to do it with my mouse, and it's going to be annoying. So give me 1 second. I'll be back. Alrighty, I'm back. Let's see. So how can you load the default color scheme in ZBrush for the UI? You go to preferences, go to configuration, and just click on restore standard UI. That should restore the UI and the colors, I believe. If it doesn't restore the colors, you can go to the eye color here, and no, it should restart all the default colors. Gives you the default UI basically. All right, so now we have the tubes there, we have the grid, we have a bunch of details. Let's go ahead and let's think, what else can we do? No, I think this is fine. So like if I'm working, you know, if I'm working on a non-destructive workflow in a way of you know, if I create in iterations and I'm sending this to a client and then obviously expecting changes and that sort of thing, this is a point where in the process where I would just save this as my close to final file and just keep it there, and then save another version where I will start merging things and tweaking things, so that if I have to go back, I have the state of this mesh, this current mesh, which is kind of like symmetrical, cleaner in a way, and then I can just go ahead and move to the next stage. Now, before I merge and convert Nanomesh to useful mesh and all that, I want to create a couple of extra meshes that I'm going to use later on as a geometry to assign material, so that they can generate some lights and some neon type of thing, like glowing pieces, and that could be in any software really. But if I have the meshes or the geometry already there, it's going to be much easier than, you know, creating new meshes and new geometry and then place them in the rendering software. So within ZBrush, that's really easy to do. And again, you can do it in any software, but with the Keyshot, the ZBrush to Keyshot bridge, for instance, is super easy to just have everything ready in the file, click the Keyshot renderer, and just in Keyshot, just assign a material to those pieces. So I want to have kind of like these neon lines going all around this frame, because it's completely, like, you won't be able to see the edges. If you pay attention to this area right here, you only see this part, and then you see a little bit at the top. So that's one of the things I want to have as a kind of like a neon thing all across. And I envision this. Oh no. All right. So I probably did a Windows update, which tends to ruin everything. So I'm not gonna work with the mouse today. Sorry, not with the pen. So let me just switch back to my usual standing desk. And I'm gonna use the mouse because unfortunately it's just not gonna work today. It's just the second time that happens very easily. So I still gonna be able to show you everything that I wanted to with just the mouse, because we're not doing a lot of sculpting really, so it'll be fine. Alrighty, so the neon light. So I envision these lines around the frames of the corridor to be kind of like always on. So if it is night or whatever, obviously in space, if the main lights are not on, you can still see the corridor. So that creates also this very sci-fi look, I guess. So I'm going to select that frame, go into solo mode, and I'm also going to the array mesh. All right, so this is just an array mesh of this mesh. So what I can do is enable Polyframe, and I'm going to extract the areas that or the piece that I want to use as a mesh to then convert it into a light or a neon piece. So I'm going to use the C modeler for that, and I think this is going to be cool. So I think this one is already has a different polygroup. Just to test it out, I'm going to hover over it, press the spacebar, make sure that QMesh is selected, and I'm going to use Polygroup all, and that way I'll tell ZBrush to only affect the polygroup that I'm selecting or clicking on. So if I click on this, Polygroup all, QMesh, there we go. So there's a couple of polygroups at the end. I think it's the same one as this one. So just to be safe, I'm going to create a new polygroup for this entire polyloop. A new polygroup for the entire polyloop. So to do that, I'm going to hover again over this polygroup, or the edge, actually will be easier. Click on polygroup, and just the default ones should be fine. And I'm going to click and then hold the Alt key a couple of times. All right. And for some reason, it's also creating a polygroup at the end, or like at the outside. So let's go ahead and do something different. I'm going to use Polygroup. Hang on, edge, Polygroup, Polyloop target. Yep, so that's a different Polygroup. I don't know why it's creating another one. It's not, definitely not connected. They might be connected actually at the bottom. I'm gonna select just this Polygroup, Ctrl Shift click and hide everything else. They're not connected, so well, let's take this chance to basically auto group this, and that should give us a different Polygroup. Yeah, I don't know why it was connecting there. Anyway, so basically using the Control and Shift key, I can isolate these pieces and then have a different Polygroup for this area. So what I want to do now is use the Q mesh and Polygroup all, so that is only going to affect this blue, light blue Polygroup. And I'm going to click and drag and then hold Control so that I can extend it. Okay, there's something going on. I need to figure out what this is first. Otherwise, I'm going to create some weird stuff. It's just creating a double-sided type of thing, but I'll clean it up after. I'm just gonna make sure I have that Polygroup there. Okay, I just use the Q mesh option, then holding Control to extract that piece, so they're basically not connected. And now I can simply hide this piece. Actually, let's hide the one that I just used. So you'll see there's kind of like a floating single-sided Polygroup here. I'm gonna hold Control and Shift to select that and isolate it. And this is what I mean. It's just being somehow connected to this one. But again, it's really easy to fix, or should be, just by auto grouping all of this. Then we can hide this one, which we want to keep, invert everything, and delete that outer bit. All right, so now we can take this one, yep, so that's by itself, and I'm going to use the Q mesh option again, Polygroup all, click and drag from this one maybe, just to add a little bit of geometry in here. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and move it sort of like in again, so that there is no gap in between the polygroups. And to do that, you can actually move the polygons along their normal. And for that, with the Q mesh is really easy. So I'm going to click as if I was going to extrude that, but I'm going to hold the Shift key, and that way I can move it kind of like in their normal a little bit. So I'm just going to do that. And I just realized that I might be able to do something more interesting. So I'm just changing my mind as I design this, but let's go ahead and just add some mesh like that. The only reason I do it, I'm thinking of doing this now, is because I can just use the mesh that I created here to create like an actual tube of neon, and then just hold it to the, to the frame in a different way. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and create some pieces with an Intermesh, and then we will separate this and simplify this so that it looks like a tube. So let's do that. I'm going to bring in a IMM machine part, IMM model kit, and I'm going to go ahead and select something like a brace or something to hold that in place. Maybe not this one, because it will have to be pretty, it would actually work. Yeah, let's use this one. So I'm gonna go ahead and also use symmetry, local symmetry, because remember this mesh is not right in the center of the world. So if I use local symmetry, ZBrush is going to add that symmetrically based on the symmetry of the actual object, the volume of the object, which in this case is pretty simple. It's just a cube, so we can use that. So I'm going to click and drag. Holding shift to rotate. And that's just going to be my little mesh that I'm going to use, maybe smaller than that. Push it in. All right, so these are the things that are gonna, like some braces that are gonna hold that mesh. I'm gonna push this one down. And in order to create a few more, I'm just gonna hold Control, click and drag. And I'm gonna let go around there. Let go of the Control key. And then Siri is going to allow me to duplicate this based on the distance. So it's gonna be a consistent distance. Okay. Sorry, before I do that, I'm gonna duplicate it or do the same thing here for the top bit. So Control, click and drag. Just rotating this one in place. And I'm gonna place it here kind of like in an angle. And let's do it one more time here for the top. So Control, click and drag around there. I'm gonna reset the rotation. So I have to reset, whoops. Actually, let's just keep it simple. All right. Now I can hold Control, click and drag about there, let go of Control, and that's it. All right, so now we have those bracing things, and because we are using, hang on, I think we need one more actually for the bottom. So Control, click and drag. I'm just gonna place one of these ones here. So probably there should be fine. Control, click and drag. Place it around there. All right. You can obviously spend more time making sure that those are actually in line. I just kind of like eyeball it a little bit. But now we have a set of braces or whatever holding that neon tube that is ultimately going to be just some light. But I have a bunch of polygroups, so I'm going to go ahead and use the auto group all. So now we have different polygroups everywhere, and I'm going to go ahead and isolate the actual frame so that we can split this. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and use, actually, let's enable array mesh. All right, so now we have that tube all around or all across these frames, and let's go ahead and lock this in place by accepting the array mesh. So I'm going to do a quick save. And again, this is going to be kind of like my main file that I can come back to if I need to. And now I can save a new one. I'm going to call this one final. And this is where I'm going to start merging everything together. So for this frame, I'm going to make mesh. So now these are this is not an array mesh anymore. This is actually a duplication of all those meshes. And then I'm going to go ahead and split the mesh or the frame from the actual neon shape or the tube that we created. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift and click just to isolate that. So now we have these pieces. I'm also going to isolate the actual tube. All right, so basically just isolate that tube or that piece of geometry. I'm going to invert that, and I'm going to split hidden. So in the split hidden palette, or the split palette, sorry, under the subtool palette, click on the split hidden, and now we have two meshes. Where are my tubes? Here. And I'm going to turn off Polyframe, get out of solo mode, and I'm going to assign maybe a green color, just a simple color to know which ones are going to be my lights. And I'm going to click Fill Object, and then go back to white. So now I know that everything that's green in my corridor is gonna be this kind of like neon light. Now I might not want to have that neon so close to the bottom, or actually in the actual bottom. So what I can do is isolate that, use my masking tool, invert the mask, center it, maybe turn off symmetry now, and I'm just gonna push it down and scale it on the z-axis so that it maintain that line. All right, so that way I don't have that neon at the bottom. The rest is kind of like cool, but that's how easy it is to change things on the fly. Like if you're already if this is the third time that you watch this, because this has been for about 4 streams, I think, or 3. You probably know that I change things quite a bit as I go, in terms of the design. But yeah, I think that works. All right, so let's go ahead now and convert the rest of the stuff to actual mesh. So let's select this one. For this one, there's a slight gap which we want to keep anyway. I just realized there's some kind of like angle in the array mesh. I don't know if it's the array mesh or the Nanomesh, so I'm gonna just double check that quickly. So it's not the array mesh. The array mesh is fine. Might be in the Nanomesh. I think it's fine now. I think it works. All right. I think it's at the end. You know what? I think it has to do with. Let me just check. Yeah, there's something weird going on here, and that probably has to do with the insertion of the tube. So the actual wall is fine. It's just the tube that we inserted is not straight, I think, and that's what is screwing everything up. So if we go to the edit mesh, just to actually edit this mesh, I can hold Ctrl and Shift and click on this to isolate it. Let's turn on Polyframe. Hang on, Ctrl Shift, click on that to isolate it. All right, so this is probably the issue. Just gonna reset the rotation. Yeah, it's not perfectly straight, but it's very, very tiny. You won't be able to see it. And again, this is just a yeah. All right, I'm gonna leave it like that. Click Edit Mesh, and I'm gonna go ahead and go to Inventory. And I'm gonna click on One to Mesh, and that should have created that, converted the mesh into Nanomesh. It just duplicated the whole thing, because now this is a solid mesh and it's duplicating the array mesh by 2. So we just need to tweak the array mesh and set it to 1, and that's pretty much it. Another option that you have, if you don't want to use the array mesh, oh, hang on, I forgot, but we actually had 2 walls. So that's why we have 2 different sets. Again, that's not a problem. We can go ahead and hide this one, this side, delete that, and then we can use the array mesh and just tweak the position of it. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, if you want to keep things even simpler, is do it manually by simply duplicating this and mirror it. So that way you have 2 subtools, or you can use the array mesh. Like I said, at this point, I already had everything in place, and I'm basically rearranging stuff, I'm merging things together. So whatever is easier to complete the job. So in this case, I can just duplicate this. I'm sure this is not right in the middle, so if I mirror it, it's gonna end up kind of like way off, but let's just mirror that on the z-axis. So now it's in here, and I can bring in this closer just by moving it like so. And again, I'm just eyeballing it, but I'm using the other one as a reference of how to place it. And I think that's pretty close. But again, now we have two different subtools that we can work with. Another thing you can do is, if you want to assign different materials and that sort of stuff to this actual mesh, you can combine it together and just simplifying the polygroup. So if I do that, let me just show you. Let's see, we can take these ones. I think polygroups are fine, so there's not many polygroups. So one thing we can do is hide everything, make sure this is a single polygroup. So we have to select the grid to hide it, Ctrl and Shift and click on that. So that is just the grid bit. Actually, this is all over the place, but let me simplify things even more. Before I actually duplicate it, I can go ahead and separate that. I'm just trying to give you more ideas of how you can use this process, but I wasn't planning on doing it. But if I go back to the original, so the one on the right hand side, I can do all those polygrouping in this one before I duplicate. So I'm going to do that just to show you how we go about it. I'm going to turn off the line so you can only see the colors of the fill. So holding Ctrl and Shift, I'm going to isolate just the grids or the lines for the grids. And I'm going to hold Ctrl W. That will assign a single polygroup to that, so that I can assign, metal or some kind of wire material for that. The rest of the tubes, the rest of the polygroups are fine. I just want to unify the nuts and bolts maybe, and probably some parts here on this base. So I can select just these polygroups of the base of this kind of like antenna or tube. I don't know what this would be. A sci-fi thingy. Let's get closer. So all of these would be a single polygroup. Oh no, hang on. I missed a couple of stuff. This one. There we go. And I'm gonna auto group this and hide the tubes or these joints. So this is just the simple process of holding Ctrl and Shift to with the select rectangular to select different things, hide them, invert selection, Ctrl W to assign a single polygroup, and that way you have different polygroups for all of that. The same thing for these nuts and bolts. And remember, because we use Nanomesh to duplicate that entire section or chunk of the wall, the polygroups are going to be exactly the same for the other ones. So I can only concentrate, well, I don't only have to concentrate on this to sort of hide these bits, and it will be the same for the rest of the pieces of the wall. All right, so if I invert that, so these are all the nuts and bolts, Ctrl W, so now they're all going to be a single group. Perfect. So there's one that is not though, which is this one. Oh, I didn't see that coming. All right, so let's auto group all of that. I'm going to hide these. Auto group that, invert selection. Now I can go ahead and isolate all of these bases. And auto group that. Cool. All right, so I think we are ready to go. So now that I have this one, I can also take the placement. So remember, this is kind of like the flat plane that we use as a base for the Nanomesh. You can remove that, so holding Ctrl and Shift to isolate it. Hang on, let me do it again. Right, and just invert and control, well, I have it mapped to my Ctrl X, but you can go to geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. That's what I've been using to delete that. I'm not going to delete it because I do like this light gap that is between the panels. So when I move into the rendering software, if I have a flat plane that covers that, there's not going to be any leaking of light through those gaps, but it's going to give me that paneling effect. So I'm going to leave it there for now. So now I can go ahead and do what I did before. So duplicate it, go to mirror in the Z-axis, because in this case I'm working on the Z-axis. So mirror that, bring in the gizmo. Now I can get out of solo mode, and I'm going to use the other one that I already placed as a guide, and just place this using the gizmo. And now I'm going to select the other one, delete. Okay. All right. So all of that was basically to have the same polygroups on one side as the other. So when I assign the materials data, I can do it by polygroups, or I can split polygroups if I need to. But yeah, essentially every polygroup will be different, or a different material. The next thing I want to do is create some other lights that I can use, like neon bits and pieces. For that, I'm going to go ahead and use another piece of geometry. So again, that's another thing that you could have done from before you duplicate it. But if you want to have some kind of like light coming through here, you can do that before you duplicate. I think I'm fine. I just want to create some panels here at the top for the roof, and let's click on the roof as well, and make sure that we have we convert this as well. So Nanomesh. So this is just a Nanomesh. We don't have a ray mesh here. Cool. And before I do any of this, I'm gonna bring in my C modeler, BMZ. Hang on, BZM. Sorry. That's the shortcut for the C modeler. I'm going to click on edit mesh, and that allows me to edit this actual mesh. And I'm going to give these polygroups as well before I convert this into an actual geometry, so that again we can assign different materials. I think what I want to do is keep that line as probably some additional neon bit, just in case. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go back to the move brush just in case. I want to select all of these polygroups and try to make sense of what I'm doing, really. 1 second. Okay, so this is going to be a single polygroup. This one as well. All right, so I'm going to basically auto group, Ctrl W to group this in a single color, a single group ID. These ones I'm just going to hide the top ones and the ones at the bottom. Ctrl W so that I have a different polygroup. So I ultimately have 3 different polygroups. So I have these panels, these green panels, which could be, yeah, kind of some light stuff, or we can, make something even more interesting, like some tungsten tubes inside there, and we have some transparency later with some panels. So in order to do that, I'm gonna bring in the C modeler. So this is just making things a bit more complex than what I had in mind, but I think it's gonna help. So I'm gonna use the QMesh polygroup all, click on this one and push it holding shift. So just increasing the gap, obviously. And then I'm gonna hold control, well, I'm gonna click and then hold control to extract this. So this is just gonna be that little additional piece of geometry that we can assign a transparent material, and it's going to give us that impression that there's something inside. So before I move this back in, what I'll do is I'll create a couple of tubes in here, and for that I can just use the insert brushes. So let's go to model kit, and this one should have a couple of things that will look nicer as tubes. Where are they? like something like this pipe 10, that'll be fine. Just click and drag, bring in the Gizmo 3D. I'm gonna reset the rotation of that so that it's perfectly straight. Scale it down and then up in the y-axis. Push this down as well. So now what I'll do is, by the way, I'm going to assign a polygroup. Whoops. Invert that, assign a polygroup. Whoops. Again. Just trying to give it a different polygroup so that I can isolate it. And I'm gonna hold Ctrl to duplicate it, and then let go Ctrl so that it's perfectly aligned, one with each other, or all of these tubes. And that's gonna be, you know, I assign a material for this one. That's gonna be the tungsten line light, and I'm gonna do the same thing for the other side. So Ctrl. There we go. So now we have this set of polygroups. We can take the green one now and just integrate it with the blue one, right? And I can take this one now. Before I actually move it, I want to give it some thickness actually. So BZM to bring in the C modeler and give it a tiny little bit of thickness. If you hold the Alt key as you drag, I haven't let go of my click and just pressing the Alt key, that will assign a new ID or a new color, just so it's easy to see. And then I'm going to go ahead and hide this, assign a single polygroup again, mask everything, invert that mask, center that, and I'm going to push this back. So again, this is just going to be kind of like the cover, some plastic or glass, and then inside I know there are some tubes that I can assign because they have different polygroups. I can assign like a light, and that'll be it. All right, so that's the editing of that Nanomesh. If I click Edit Mesh, I'll go back to this, and all of my Nanomesh, my entire roof for this corridor will have the same thing, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and save this as another copy because these are changes that I made before, and before I convert this into an usable mesh. I'm going to save it as a new file. And I'll check the chat in a second. I see some activity there. Just want to finish this roof first. One to mesh, done. So now we have the roof as well. So just gonna do a quick recap of everything. The floor as well, that's working. The frame, the door. What else do I have to convert? Oh, this bit here. I think it's gonna be the same in the same case as the wall. So let's fix this one first. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the array mesh now. Convert this into a Nanomesh. One to mesh. And the polygroup for this is pretty simple, so just leave it as it is. Get out of solo mode. Go to my subtool. I'm gonna duplicate this, or you can use array, like I said, not a big deal. I'm gonna center this, mirror on the z-axis, center that, and I'm just gonna bring this closer. And I'm just using the other one as a reference to where to put it. That's it. So I think we have completed. We have converted everything. I'm just gonna go quickly through everything. So from the first subtool, I'm gonna open up Nanomesh, and I'm gonna use my arrow keys to go down everything. See, this is still a Nanomesh. So I'm just gonna convert that one to mesh. That was the door. Cool. And this is just a plane. Don't know what this is really. I'm gonna delete it. That's probably just an old piece that we left there. Cool, so everything is converted. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this, and this would be, you know, my file that I can edit in terms of symmetry and make it a bit more interesting. But before I do any of that, I'm going to go to this bit, and I have a bunch of polygroups here, so I want to make sure that these ones are a single polygroup, so I can assign a single material to those. There we go. Same thing with these. All of these colors would be eventually different materials, I guess, or not. But you know, we can just go ahead and simplify it. So that base, the entire base, could be a different color. Right, and this one as well. So again, it's just the same game, hiding stuff. Ctrl W to assign different colors. I want to grab that line in the middle. There we go. And I'm just gonna make it the same as that one. All right. The rest, I just noticed there's some issues here, but because we have different polygroups, I can bring in the Move Topological brush, click on this purple one, and then just reposition it. So these are the type of tweaks that I would do at this stage. Everything else seems to be fine. These little bolts, this should be the same color. There's a bunch of polygroups in here. Okay, invert that. There we go. But I also want to have these other ones as well as part of the polygroup. Ctrl W. All right, so that's done for that. That's it for that. We can assign different materials later on. For that one, the same thing for the door. I'm going to go ahead and delete the placement of the door so that we have a transparency for the window. Or actually, you know what? We can take that plane, mask it, invert the mask, and we can use the gizmo to just sort of position that as, you know, some kind of glass. So I'm just reusing that placement polygon to convert it into the actual glass of this door. And what I'll do is give it a bit of thickness. So select a different polygroup for that. Whoops. And let's bring in the C modeler again. Polygroup all, QMesh. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of thickness there. And now we can go ahead and auto group everything. So now we have different polygroups for everything. Maybe I pushed it forward too much. All right, let's bring back that a bit. All right, so that one would be the glass. At the end, you can simply split everything by polygroup, like if, for example, if you send it to Keyshot, or you can also create what? Let's hope for the best, guys. Abnormal termination. Well, we didn't lose much, if we lose anything. But I trust that the quick save had worked. Let me just restart ZBrush. In the meantime, let me check the chat. Can you type in the chat or not? I don't know if that's a question for myself. But yeah, I can type in the chat. I haven't updated ZBrush. Okay, let me go to my quick save. And Polyframe, great, we didn't lose much. So let me just save in case it happens again. All right, so we are back where we left off. That's pretty cool. We have all the meshes that we need. Let me just check the chat again. Hard surface in ZBrush is so confusing. It might be the first time that you, like in any software really, I guess. Please tell how to make a robotic claw. One big claw, square from start and bended with point. That's yeah, that's a super specific question. I don't know if I know how to answer that, at least within this stream. I think as a general rule, thinking in those terms of how to do something specific might be useful if you're starting up. But I much rather, I prefer to learn the tool itself so that I can apply that to any other project, not a specific how to do a specific thing. So my suggestion would be to learn, to practice with that if you want, but learn the tool so that you can apply it to something else rather than knowing the specific workflow of creating something so specific as a mechanic claw. So yeah, sorry, that's kind of like what I think would be best. How can I make a shoulder like this? I don't see the link. Sorry for the link reference. I don't see a link. Huh. All right. We have about 40 minutes, so let's go ahead and add some details and set this up for what would be the render. So right now this is looking pretty symmetrical in a way, which is part of the idea of what I wanted to create, but I'm gonna add a couple of details that will add that asymmetry, although keeping everything very clean in a way. And for that I'm gonna create some kind of maybe like a computerized arm, like a mechanical arm, very quick one, just to hold the screen. And maybe if we have time, actually let's do the other way around. I'm gonna create a label here at the top, like a sign, like a neon sign or something like that, those type of things that you would see on a tram or a train, like for the next station, in here. And then also if we have time we do the computer type of thing. Comics Legend, if you were creating this corridor without talking, teaching while working, how long would it take you to finish? I reckon, I don't want to say like, I would say maybe, I don't know, 4 hours to complete the whole thing to this stage. Just because throughout these streams, I've been showing you different techniques to do the same thing and showing you different ways to achieve the same thing as well. And we're running into some issues. But if I were just doing this for work or for a client, I sort of like have an idea of already what I can use for my workflow that is going to be faster, and I just I can do it like that. Yeah, but it would depend. It would depend. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump into a new tool. So let's select cube, and let's go into Polymesh 3D, cube, just to simplify it. I'm gonna hold Ctrl W to assign a single polygroup, and that's gonna be the base. So let's scale this on the x-axis and enable symmetry so that we can work a little bit faster as well. And this is not right in the center. I don't know what's going on. Let me undo that. The gizmo wasn't in the center, or it was. It was fine. I just had symmetry, perspective on, so it looked a little bit weird. All right, so now I have that. This one is going to be pretty simple. All I want to do is maybe move these points down. So I'm just masking points and using the gizmo to give it a bit of form. And I think that would be fine. Maybe scale it up a bit, and in the z-axis as well. And I'm going to give it a tiny little bit of curvature here, so we can take these ones at the bottom and scale that. All right, so that's kind of like my base, and now we can use the C modeler. So let's bring that, and I can tag these polygons here and at the back as well, and I'm gonna insert that. So insert region, the entire region, and do it like this, holding Alt just to assign a different polygroup. And I'm gonna make sure that these lines are actually aligned. Same thing here for the top. All right, and then I'm going to use again the C modeler to tag this holding Alt, and these ones as well on the other side. And I'm going to go ahead and push this in. Whoops, make sure I have QMesh selected. Push this in, holding the Alt key just to add a different polygroup. And that's really all there is to it. Just going to isolate that polygroup, the blue one, which will be ultimately the screen. Invert everything, hold Ctrl W, and that's just going to assign a different polygroup. So I have two groups in here and a simple mesh that I can, place somewhere into the mesh. Now, there's a few things that I'm going to do to sort of create a rounded set of, or a beveling to all of these meshes. So again, if I keep everything separate, it's going to be much easier to control the dynamic subdivision. In this case, I can just enable that and go to QGrid. I'm going to do that from the right hand side so you guys see it, because I have it in my UI, but it's covered by the graphics of the stream. So if you go to geometry, dynamic subdivision here, I'm going to enable QGrid to 1, maybe turn off Polyframe so you can see what I'm doing. That's pretty much all there is to it. You can change these to chamfer maybe if you want a softer version, and change the coverage if you want a sharper bit. So I think that's working fine. All right, so with that, you don't have to actually convert it. It's a preview, so if I turn this off, you'll see the previous version. The dynamic means that it's kind of like showing you a preview of how it would look at this subdivision level, and with the set and arrangement of bevels. So if I were to apply this dynamic subdivision, just pay attention to what happens with the geometry. It just adds these loops, and it adds them in this way because that's what I arrange within the coverage, bevel, and all that. So if I undo that and I change the, let's say, turn off bevel and constant, and click apply, then it's going to be slightly different. Same thing if I just change the coverage, something like this, apply, then it's going to be the actual number of subdivision, and it's not the number of subdivision, sorry, the placement of that would be different. So I'm gonna keep it simple again, the way that I had it before. I think it was 0.1, something like that. Copy, go back to my corridor, paste. So that's gonna be another piece that I can use. Center that. I'm gonna turn off symmetry for this now. Rotate 90 degrees and scale it down. And I'm just gonna place one of these. So I'm not gonna have more than one. Changing the size will alter the dynamic subdivision in this case. So I'm gonna have to rework on that, I think. All right, so there it is. I'm going to place it just behind that. I'm going to isolate everything but the roof and that bit. So to do that, let me just put this back into my original folder. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and click on the visibility icon. That's basically, toggle everything off. So I can just toggle this one back on and the roof as well. Choose this one. There we go. And I can just tweak the coverage for this again. I'm going to place it in one of these ones. Maybe a little bit further. All right. I think that works. Let's bring back everything else. There we go. I might have to push it forward a bit more, just so that it doesn't cover, or is not covered by the other bits. Actually, let's hide everything again. But the floor, sorry, the roof, where is the roof? And the frames, so that I can see actually what's going on. So I'm going to place this after the frame, around there. No, actually, I'm going to put it in front. So if I put it in front, because if I put it after and then we have the neon lights, it's not going to make any sense to have this as a device to, you know, display a message if you won't be able to see it. All right, so that's it. Pretty easy. The next thing I would like to do is that I'm going to do a quick save just in case. That kind of like monitor with a mechanical arm. Well, not a mechanical arm, just something to hold it. It's not going to be very complex. So, but you know, I can show you some of the stuff. Let's see. Cool. Diego, hey, he's the dude of the eye too. I think you're referring to the multi-eye tool. Might be, yes. At the end of this sculpture, are you using the Dynamesh mode to all meshes, especially organic sculpting such as cassowary bird work? And yeah, depending on the project. So for the cassowary, I think I left everything. Oh no, actually I did a retopology, a quick series measure for that. It just really depends on the project, really. It's hard to say, you know, it's hard to say use Dynamesh for this and use subdivisions for this other thing, and you know, it totally depends on the project and what the requirements are. For instance, if I'm doing just a 3D maquette, so as a concept, before it goes to production, I would just leave it as a Dynamesh probably, so that I can just quickly do a polypaint, send that over, get a sign off on the design, and then if they say, oh, I like this, let's move forward with the production, then I have to retopologize and do all that. But you know, it really depends on the project. It's hard to say this point. Hey Javier, how's it going? Good to have you here. Javier is one of the extra milers. By the way, guys, let me just do a quick announcement here that we have a few more people so that everyone knows. The first thing is that I forgot to mention is that the extra mile enrollment by request is finishing this at the end of this week. Sorry, at the end of this week, because we are reaching that point that I need to sort of concentrate on whoever has joined us as a new student. So if you're interested, just send me an email, like I said, to Pablo M at 3dconceptartist.com. I'll put it in here if you're interested. Sorry. Again, if you're interested in the extra mile, that's the email. I'm gonna have to sort of close it back again at the end of the week, so just letting you know. Now the other thing, the extra mile power here. The other thing is what I mentioned at the beginning. So I just Javier just reminded me that I should also mention it here. Again, because I'm moving houses and I have to reconnect my internet, I'm gonna be out of action for a week. and that's the reason why. And basically, I'm gonna be out of action at the end of today. So that's the reason I'm gonna give everyone an extension on the deadline. So the deadline for the challenge is 1 day and 13 hours. So I'm gonna change this after the stream. So you guys have about 8 more days to complete your submission. If you have already submitted, you can, and you wanna do tweaks, you can do that as well. But anyway, you have more time to polish your renders. There's some really cool stuff already being published in here. And if you have submitted and you cannot see the work in the gallery straight away, it's because it has to go through a process of filtering. So please allow for a few hours to entry to appear in the gallery until it's finally approved. That is just because I have to do it manually and making sure that you sort of like the submission meets all the requirements before it's there and the judges can have a look at it. So yeah, you're gonna have about 1 extra week roughly to complete your characters, or sorry, your environments. By the way, there's a lot of characters, so the competition is tough in that area, but there's only a few transport and environment. So if you wanna have a crack at that, I reckon there's more chances because there's a lot of competition with really cool concepts in characters. Anyway, that's it. And the other thing is obviously the clay pack. There is a free update, so if you already got it, you should have an email with the 10 new brushes and 15 new matcap materials. If you haven't got it, it will be included as you download it. But if you got it, if you have already bought the pack and you haven't got this, just send me an email. I'll make sure I refresh the link, but check your spam folder because sometimes it just goes there. Anyway, so that's it. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and do that monitor bit. And that's something that we can use with insert meshes and Nano C modeler as well, pretty quick. So let's click on the cube again. I always start with a cube. Doesn't really matter because I always, convert it to a Q cube. By the way, you cannot see that button. So if you go down to the bottom, initialize, it's in here, Q cube. So this is going to be the base for the monitor, and it's going to be a slightly different type of monitor. It's going to be a chunky one, not like a super sci-fi thingy. So it's going to be something like that. And I'm going to make it vertical. All right, so that's the monitor. I'm going to add a bit of, maybe not that much. And with the C modeler now, I'm going to add a bit of back here. So I'm going to do this a little bit faster so you guys see that it's actually really easy and really fast to work with ZBrush once you know those commands. Alright, so that's the base of the monitor, and the rest is going to be just insert meshes, and of course we can use dynamic subdivision. Dynamic Q grid. So yeah, I think I want to go for this sort of like rounded shape. Maybe we can add a couple of additional a couple of insert polyloops just to sharpen those edges a bit more. Cool. And also let's go ahead and move this slightly. Cool. And I'm going to sharpen this area as well with another insert mesh, or insert loop, sorry. There we go. So that's the base of the monitor. For the screen though, we could just simply extrude this. So click on this turn off dynamic for the time being. Polygroup all. Oh, is it? What? This is QMesh. I just made a mistake here. All right. So polygroup all. Let me just double check. Spacebar. QMesh polygroup all. Selecting this polygroup. Click and drag, holding Control. There we go. And so this is gonna be the kind of like the screen of this. I want to make sure I assign a new polygroup to that, and I'm going to extrude it to get a little bit of a curvature here. Not extruded, sorry. Push these ones slightly, holding Shift. And I'll also scale that. So I'm going to go to Scale, Polygroup All. All right, and then move this one back a bit. So this is going to look a little bit better once I turn on the dynamic subdivision. Cool. So I'm going to invert that mask and bring the screen back in there. And if I enable dynamic, it should be much better. Actually, the dynamic subdivision that I'm using for this won't really work for this screen for what I want. So I can just tweak that, like you see here, and then just play with some additional edge loops. All right, just with that, symmetry is a little bit easier, obviously. So I'm just adding some edge loops here. And that should do the trick. If anything, we can just use the move brush or just flatten these ones, these lines. This is the type of thing that I always do if I'm not following a design. I just keep changing things. I think this one is fine. All right. Just playing with the coverage. I think that'll be fine. If anything, another thing that what you can do is just, because we have different polygroups, really, right, is just a split hidden. So now you have two different polygroups with two different set of dynamic subdivision settings. So the first one, we can just keep it as it was before, a bit sharper. And then for the second one, we can simply remove the Q grid so that it's very smooth and increase the smoothness. Right, so that's a little bit better. I just want a tiny bit of curvature anyway, and I'm going to increase the size of this. Cool. All right, that might took longer than what I intended. I'm going to insert, or I'm going to duplicate one of these things and convert it into a QMesh again. Initialize QMesh, and the reason I duplicated is because I want to keep those dynamic subdivision settings. So now I have this little cube that I'm going to place. So that cube, just scale it down, push it inside. That's just a dummy mesh so that I can insert a few things into that mesh, and it's not going to change. It's not going to use the dynamic subdivision settings of the other ones. So let's bring in this model kit. Again, you can have your own model kit. For this, I'm just going to keep it simple, and I'm going to use similar stuff to the things that I already use. I'm going to use a handle here. Click and drag. Reset rotation. Maybe put it on the other side. Make it smaller. All right, so just a little handle there. I want to use a couple of these meshes to add some more geometry to the actual screen or to the actual monitor. So this pipe 10, something that we've used, and again, it's something that I like to do is if I'm using insert meshes, like in this case, I like to sort of like keep everything within the same visual language in a way. So I would use or keep using this type of mesh across multiple assets so that it looks part of the same thing. I'm going to use another of these tubes, probably this one here at the top. And just scale it down as well. So we kind of like designing things as we go. Let's add a couple of like an antenna type of thing. I guess if it is plugged in, you don't really need it, but you know, makes it look more interesting in this case. I'm going to use some of the panels here at the bottom just to add some vents. And again, this is another sort of asset that we use across the design, so it should be fine. If you want to see kind of like a more thorough version of what I'm doing right now, which is just inserting meshes and just add to the design, I have a full series with booleans actually that to create kind of like a sci-fi thing as well, and that's obviously more thorough, and I explain a few other techniques because this one is just really fast, just in case you're interested. So let's add one of these ones here at the back. But you know, there's not much to explain in this case. It's just insetting meshes. Other than what I mentioned about, you know, try to keep everything within the same visual language. And what I mean by that is, even though this is just a, you know, isolated piece that we're gonna put inside the corridor, I would stay away from using, let's say, this one, right? Because although there are some diagonals in the actual corridor, this might not be the same. It might be too different from the entire look that I'm going for. So that's really the only thing that I'm try to keep an eye on when doing this. I'm gonna use this one to hold whatever mechanical arm we're gonna create in just a second. We have about 20 minutes. That's plenty. Plenty of time for creating that mechanical thing, which again is gonna be super simple. Another thing that I could say about this process is that obviously I'm just using the standard or the IMM brushes that come with ZBrush just so that if you guys want to follow along, that's you can do that. But you can definitely get different insert brushes, right? And use those insert brushes to create something a bit more complex. So depending on the complexity of the insert mesh, you will be able to create something way different. And sometimes, like, using these brushes might look a little bit like you might be able to identify those brushes, especially because they are the default ones, and you know, a lot of people use them. They're really cool. I use them a lot. But you know, if you wanna something slightly different, definitely you can create or buy, or you know, generate your own insert brushes. And I use a couple of rounded shapes here. Maybe this one. All right, so that's probably where we're gonna use to hold that. I'm gonna put a couple of maybe these bolts. Actually, let's set the size with the brush, so we can use the Control key. So click and drag, holding Control, it will give me exactly the same size. So the placement is different. Let's activate symmetry. All right, let's say that this mash of meshes, it's the monitor. Let's do the arm, and that's going to be holding it. And again, it's going to be super simple. We could even use you know what, we can probably use just insert meshes. But just before I do any of that, remember, this is everything that we've added is being added to this little cube that has dynamic subdivision. So if I turn dynamic off, you'll see all the faceted polygons like so, right? So on, off. So what I'll do is, now that we have a bunch of meshes, we don't really need that cube anymore. So I can hide it, invert it, and delete hidden. And now the dynamic is applied to all these objects. Doesn't matter, you can leave the cube in there. So now we have dynamic subdivision for all of these in different sort of like states. And what we can do obviously is merge everything together and toggle dynamic, apply dynamic subdivision, and then merge everything together. Before I do that, I'm gonna do the kind of like the arm that is holding things in place. And for that, I'm pretty sure we can just use some meshes from here. Let's see. Let's use this one, and then we'll add a couple more things. So I'm gonna drag this in, reset the rotation, right? So just on its own, and I'm gonna split unmask points. So now this is going to be in its own subtool that we can manipulate. We can also go into solo mode as well. I'm gonna bring in some of the pipes, maybe this one, simple one, and again, click and drag, reset the rotation 90 degrees. I'm gonna try to place that within that hole. Doesn't have to be perfect. Actually, I can just do it a bit bigger than the actual hole. And move this one back a bit. I'm gonna invert the mask center the unmasked areas. I'm going to flatten this a bit more. This is just a way to hold this. Let's duplicate that one now. Cool. So now we have this bead. That's going to be, you know, something to hold everything in place. We can bring in maybe, let's see. Yeah, this pipe is working fine. Maybe this one. I'm going to center this whole thing so that is in the center of the world, and I can use now symmetry to insert this other pipe. Click and drag, reset the rotation. Oops, not reset it. Holding the Alt key and reset the rotation of just the pivot. 90 degrees. Push this one in. And I guess this one could be kind of like the way to rotate that pivot. Let's see, what else can we use? Again, you can be super thorough about this, but I'm just gonna keep it simple. So in a way, just designing as I go with the whatever I have at hand, which in this case is just a bunch of insert meshes. And another thing that maybe I could say is that the way that I use these insert meshes doesn't really necessarily mean that I'm trying to, you know, make everything fit within itself, or like make something mechanical that works perfectly fine. I'm just paying attention to the forms, really, and making sure that whatever I add, it has some kind of, it makes some kind of like visual sense as to why I'm putting it in there. I don't know if that makes any sense, but rather than just placing things for the sake of adding stuff and making more complex, I'm just trying to concentrate on the actual form and the, let's say, the primary shape, I would say, and just making sure that the meshes that I'm using are being used to describe the overall shape, rather than this one will fit exactly within this hole, or this doesn't really make sense. It's like, you know, intersecting geometry, all that. But if you obviously want to do something that works mechanically, that you would animate, you probably need to spend a lot more time in this case doing this. All right, and just to wrap up this piece, what we can do is, let me just think what would be an easy way to rotate that. I think we can do it after, but I want to add some tubes. We have 10 minutes. I reckon we can do that very quickly. So I'm going to use the curve brush, or we can actually use the one that I created beforehand. And I'll do this. Hang on. Picker once. All right, so this is the tube thing that we use for the ground floor. I'm going to enable elastic so that I can push it the way that I want to. And remember, if I click and then hold shift, I can smooth that curve. Just increase the the thickness of those cables. I think that's gonna be all right. Again, we have a lot of these. I'm gonna turn off elastic now. We have a lot of these cables, so later we can just simply split it a little bit with the move topological brush. All right. So that's a part of the arm, and now we can just get out of solo mode. Use this to maybe place that. If you hold the Alt key, you basically you untoggle this. You see, if I press Alt in my keyboard, this basically unlocks the gizmo, so I can place that wherever I want to just move the pivot. So holding Alt, I can reposition this around there, and I'm just gonna place it around there. So that's the reason I did that whole thing, just to place this. And obviously now we can rotate it and give it a tiny bit more of a interesting look. Then I can hold Control and duplicate this whole thing. Like that, maybe even from the top would be interesting. And then I'll do another one. So Control, click and drag and rotate it like so. So you'll see I'm not necessarily, I mean, this doesn't fit within, I mean, it's not fitting properly, but I'm concentrating is on the overall form that reads well and makes it interesting. So that's kind of like what I had in mind. And because we have those cables, I can go ahead and move topological brush. I'm gonna do a quick save. Right, and I can just, for example, take this one and push it down a bit, you know, add a bit of sort of gravity in this case. And that one kind of like makes sense to, at least this part of the mechanical arm kind of like makes sense to have it like this. These other ones, we can just use this to add variation. And maybe a little bit more of gravity here, like a dangling type of cable. All right, so that makes it look a bit more interesting. And now all we have to do really is move it into our working file. So because obviously we have this into a bunch of subtools, if I just merge everything down, then we're gonna have a single type of dynamic subdivision. So the same settings will be applied to the entire mesh. I think they work for everything except for the screen. So basically I have the same settings for dynamic subdivision for everything except the screen. So what I'll do is I'll select the screen and I'm gonna apply the dynamic subdivision. So hit apply, and then I'm gonna go ahead and select the other ones and I'm gonna merge them down. So merge down, okay, merge down, okay. All right, so you'll see I lost my dynamic subdivision, or at least the settings that I had for the rest. So I can go back to dynamic and I can just tweak this to see if I can make it more interesting for the rest of the assets. I think we have too much geometry in this case. Let's split the mechanical arm. So because I have polygroups, by the way, that's really easy, just holding Control and Shift to hide all of these pieces. split hidden. And now let's see dynamic subdivision again. And with the C modeler, I'm just gonna add some edge loops. Insert edge loop, just to sharpen those lines. So this is something that I could have done beforehand, but I kind of like the roundness in here. Just wanted a sharper edge for the actual screen, but the rest of the edges are kind of cool. Maybe add another one here. Yeah, I think that looks good. All right, so I'm going to apply this dynamic subdivision. I have 4 levels of subdivision, and I'm going to do the same thing for the arm. Let's go into dynamic. I'm going to turn off grid so that I have a very clean mesh. Subdivision 4, apply subdivision. So now I have, oops, let's subdivision level 4, 5, let's see, delete higher. I just want to make sure that the amount of subdivisions that I have in all of the meshes are exactly the same. There we go. So now I have, currently I applied the dynamic subdivision to the arm, to the monitor, and to the screen, right? So we basically have 4 subdivision levels. And because all of them have the same amount of subdivision, let me just show you. So the screen has 4, the monitor has 4, and the arm has 4. I can go ahead and merge visible. So click merge visible, and I should be able to retain the subdivision level. No, because I merged visible. Hang on. I'm gonna duplicate all of that. Well, I guess in this case we can reconstruct, but one second. Yeah, I can. I'm going to duplicate all of this by simply putting it into a folder. And before I do that, I'm going to save this as monitor. So let's click on new folder. And I'm going to put everything within that folder. So all the parts in here, right? So everything is within this folder. And from the cog icon, I'm going to go ahead and click on merge visible. Merge folder, sorry. So that gives us this mesh. We also lost that one, so we need to make sure that I don't have any dynamic subdivision. Let's see what's happening. So we have 4, 4, and 4. Okay, so I'm gonna just duplicate the entire folder. Duplicate the entire folder. All right. So now I'm gonna do it manually. So I'm gonna merge this one first. Merge down. Okay. Sorry. I know what's going on. Let me delete this folder. And I'm gonna duplicate this monitor and put it out. So I still have my folder with the originals. No, that's not the one that I needed. Hang on. Duplicate. Delete. All right. Second go. So I have everything in my folder. It's all the originals, and then I have a duplicate of all the pieces. So I'm gonna go down to the lowest subdivision level, and I'm gonna try this again. I'm gonna try to retain those subdivisions. See if I can do that. If not, it's not a big deal. Nah, I won't retain them. So you know what? Let's just keep it the way that we were doing it before. So I'm gonna merge everything, merge folder, merge folder. Now it's not giving me the right result. Something's going on. Merge folder. There we go. So I'm gonna take this one. It's not that big of a deal anyway. Copy and go to, where is it, here? Here is my tunnel. I'm gonna paste that just because we ran out of time. I'm gonna set the pivot point around there, scale it, and I'm gonna rotate it. Kind of like 45 degrees will be fine. All right. Let's go ahead and scale this down. And I'm going to turn off some of the walls very quickly. Frame as well. All right. So now I can see where I'm placing this. So I'm going to put it maybe on this side. And somehow this is going to be attached to the wall. So I'm going to push that in quite a bit. I know this is kind of like hard to see what I'm doing. There we go. It's not completely attached to the wall, so we can use an Intermesh in here as well. Something very simple. Something squarish. Let's see. We can take this one, insert it there, and then rotate and scale in the z-axis. That should give us enough geometry sort of to make it look like this thing is coming out of that area. Again, it's not perfect, but it works fine. Okay, so that's it, guys. That's pretty much all I wanted to do in this stream. Just add a few more details, that neon light. But remember, we have the tubes inside going through that sort of like rail at the top, or like the roof. We can just go ahead and assign a light to that as well. We have the glass for the door. So this is just a matter of splitting everything into polygroups, which I'll do later on. Set it into Keyshot or to Maverick Render, whatever you want, and create that render. Other than that, I don't know if you guys have any questions, because we have to wrap it up for today. Like I said, I'm going to try to see if I can, pack it all into insert meshes, brushes, or something, so that you guys can reuse these somehow. But again, you have all the streams in a sequence, so if you want to recreate this, you can follow along. But I'll set up the assets. All right, let me just check the chat very quickly. Which software do you use for rendering? I use a bunch of renders. Marmoset, Keyshot, Maverick, Arnold. It depends on the project really, and the type of look that I'm after. Had to wait to make it home to post. Had a question working on a likeness of a darker complaced male. Complected male. Can see the likeness without the tone. Is there a material that emulates darker tone? Not entirely sure what you mean, but you mean like the material that you can use while working? Not entirely sure if that's what you mean. Remember that even if you have polypaint or let's say those bits that I have here, they have polypaint, right? It's a pretty bright polypaint, and I can use the skin shade color, right? The new version of ZBrush, or the latest one, 2020, you can go to the render palette and you have this slider, so you can just fade the intensity of the polypaint or the texture. It works for both, so maybe that could help. I don't know if that's really the question, but there you go. How do you do that mini menu with the tool options? I think you're talking about this one that I used to, you know, every now and again. That's a custom palette. You can create that from the preference palette, custom UI, create new palette. When you enable customize, you can create new palette or new menu, and that would create, you know, a palette for you to just combine in any way that you want to create this. And then all I did was just assign I have it here. So brush stuff, it's the new menu that I have, and my tools is the other one. So my tools is this one, and brush stuff is this one. So I just assigned a couple of shortcuts so I can access them very easy from, you know, my keyboard. I'm gonna do a tutorial about that because I get this question a lot. So I'm just gonna do one in the ZBrush guides very quickly. Q is the way to select. How hard is it to UV or wrap something like this complex? This one is pretty simple actually. You can use the Rhizome UV. It does it in a click. You know, depending on how good you want the UVs to be, and you know the continuity of the UV shells, but pretty easy. This one is really easy, or should be pretty easy. Even with the the UV master, as long as you have different polygroups, it will be super easy to do. Let me just give you an example of that. All right, so to unwrap this and to create the UVs for this, it will be pretty simple since I have polygroups. Before I do the UVs for that, I will make sure that, let's say, the grid is in a separate mesh so that it's not as complex, because otherwise it's going to be a bunch of tiny little pieces in the UV, and that's going to take a lot of the, you know, take up the textile density for the rest of the mesh, which I don't need. So maybe this grid won't have UVs, but the rest will have. So I will split that, and then as long as I have UVs, as long as I have polygroups, I can go to the UVC plugin palette, go to the UV master, and make sure that you can turn this off. You leave this polygroup on, and then ZBrush is going to give you a UV island per each polygroup. That's it. Hello, can you please make tutorial on hard surface modeling in ZBrush? There's a bunch of them. Just check the ZBrush Guides website. There's a bunch of them in there. Cool. Anyway, so I'm gonna leave it here, guys, because I'm already past my time. I need to do a bunch of stuff before they cut my internet off. And just as a quick reminder for those who weren't here, double check the challenge, the 2020 First Contact Challenge. I'm gonna update this so that I can give you guys an extra week or so of for the deadline. So I'm gonna push the deadline up about a week, so you still have time to complete whatever you're working on. It's free to join, and the prices are pretty amazing. Yeah, so I'm gonna update this in a little bit, and so I'm gonna be out of action, so you won't hear from me for a while until I get my internet back on in the new place. But once I get it, it should be pretty cool to start doing more streaming, and the internet should be better, hopefully. So have a good one, guys. Take care and stay safe inside your place. There was another thing that I was gonna mention, but I forgot. Yeah, no, I forgot.